Hey, good evening. Welcome to the Who's Left Podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from an unapologetically leftist perspective. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm broadcasting from Bloomington. So, in the Trump era, we've seen a reordering of the traditional political coalitions. Until 10 years ago, the vast majority of political debate occurred on the small L liberal democratic spectrum, right? From socialists on the left to conservatives on the right, we all adhered to some core beliefs: free and fair elections whose results are respected, the rule of law applied without fear or favor to everyone, including the powerful and well-connected, the separation of powers between independent branches of government, and state guaranteed protections for basic human rights, including the freedoms of speech, religion, assembly, and the press. These are the tenets of small L liberal democracy, and we took them for granted. Donald Trump and the MAGA movement have embraced illiberalism and have the United States on the path toward what experts call competitive authoritarianism. And in our two-party system, we've largely seen everyone who still values democracy sorted into one big tent, making for some strange bedfellows. Here, you have leftists and democratic socialists like myself now thrown into coalition with traditional conservatives, American imperialists, and national security hawks, all opposed to Trumpism, but the alliance is uneasy. Still, we all have to work together to get through this current moment and live to argue another day. My guest tonight is someone I couldn't have imagined as a guest when we started this project 3+ years ago, but alas, here we are. Stephen Cash is the executive director of the Steady State, a group of more than 400 former senior national security professionals, including former officials from the FBI, CIA, DOD, and DHS. Cash himself is a former CIA officer, senior advisor to the Undersecretary for Intelligence at DHS, chief counsel to the late Senator Dianne Feinstein, and member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. That's a mouthful, and that is only a portion of this man's impressive resume. In tonight's conversation, we'll talk about the current authoritarian moment, how we got here, and how we get through to the other side. But before we begin, if you care about independent progressive media, we could use your help. We don't paywall content. We don't charge candidates for interviews. We certainly don't have billionaire benefactors. We refuse to hide important information behind paywalls in the middle of a political crisis, even to our financial detriment. So please, if you find value in this work, go to progressiveindiana.net and subscribe at the paid level. It's only $5 a month or $50 a year to help us build the infrastructure that will pop the right-wing media bubble in this state. And while a paid subscription is the best way to help us grow and sustain this project, you can help in other ways by liking and sharing on social media, commenting, leaving reviews, providing feedback, and forwarding our content to your people. Get us when you can. Mostly, we just want you here in this community of Hoosiers dedicated to making this state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. Please join us. Follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads at whosleft.us, and on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at Who's Left. Progressive Indiana Network's handle is the full spelled out name on most sites, but on Blue Sky and TikTok, it's PIN Indiana. Please help us grow with a follow wherever you're at. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Now, I've got some serious questions, and I need Cash now. There is Stephen Cash, Executive Director of the Steady State. Welcome, sir. A pleasure to have you here with us this evening. An honor.
Great to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me. I hope you won't say alas after I've talked to you, but I'm glad to be here. And you're right. These are interesting and sometimes terrifying times. So I am so happy to talk to you.
Listen, in times like these, you don't know where you're going to find friends. And here we are in this time. And we need to pull together to defeat this authoritarian moment, which we will get into here momentarily. But first, introduce yourself to the good folks.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. So I started my career, actually, originally as a lawyer. I started as a prosecutor in New York City. So if you've ever seen Law and Order, I worked in that office. It was dirtier and the people were less attractive than they are on TV. But I came back to D.C. in 94, and I joined the Central Intelligence Agency, first as a lawyer. And I will tell you, and I think your listeners would be interested in this, I was really of two minds when I joined the agency. I come from New York City. The CIA was certainly not an organization that me, my family, and friends would have looked at particularly positively when I was growing up. And the night before I began working at the agency, I remember talking to my wife. We had just moved from New York. She gave up her job. I gave up my job. We had a rent-controlled apartment with a tiny little view of the Empire State Building. And here we were, and I'm going to show up the next morning at the CIA. And I remember telling her, I don't know what I'm going to find when I'm inside there, and I may have to resign tomorrow. And then I don't know what would have happened. Would have been pretty bad, but I didn't. And I, in many ways, fell in love with the place. It's a different kind of place to work. And interestingly enough, there are aspects of it which I think actually surprising to many people mesh fairly closely with the kind of values that we see in more centrist and maybe even left leaning areas. It's a business in most respects. And you can ask me tough questions and I'll do my best to answer them. I won't give up any classified information, but it's a business that's primarily interested in observing the world and reporting back accurately to the people who pay our salary and who ask for our stuff. Yes, it's secret. And what I'm talking about is the president, the Congress, senior policymakers, basically looking at the world and telling what we see and what we analyze. It's all about telling truth to power. And the second thing, which is I found really interesting, and I'll tell a very quick story here, a surprising amount of embrace of American constitutionalism and democracy. My very first week, you're going through the entering on duty, which involves a lot of filling out insurance forms. It's not like in the movies. But towards the end, we're in this auditorium with a whole bunch of people. We've all just joined up. Some of us are going to be ops officers, which is what I ended up being. Some of us lawyers, some of us, whatever. And an older, at least in retrospect, he seemed older at the time. He was probably not that old. I didn't have gray hair then. Came in and to talk to us, and he was a case officer, and that's an operations officer. They're the people who recruit spies and steal secrets. And he opened up, we're all looking at him, and he says, in an auditorium very much like this in Moscow, there's another group of people pretty much just like you, probably doing pretty much the same thing, and they're joining, it was the SVR, but it's the KGB's successor. And something, when they leave that room, they're going to go off to training like you, and the training's going to be pretty much the same. It'll be in Russian, but the tradecraft, whether you're an analyst or you're an operations officer or you're a security guard, it's pretty much the same. And so he said, you think those people are your colleagues? And there was dead silence in the room. And I don't know what was going to come out of this guy's mouth. And I was a little scared. And he lets that sit for a while, and then he says, absolutely not. They, unlike you, have not sworn an oath to the Constitution, which we had just done. And they, unlike you, are not going to follow the laws of Russia because the laws of Russia don't apply to them. And they don't see their job as providing truth to power to keep their country safe. Their job is keep the leader safe, an autocrat, a dictator. And he said, don't you ever forget, they are not your colleagues. And I found during my time at the agency, he spoke truth. We weren't powerful, but he spoke the truth. And I was very comfortable with all of the things that I worked on. I will tell you something else I found. For very good reasons, in ordinary times, our intelligence services, and I know in the movies, we're always killing presidents, fixing elections here in the United States, doing all that stuff. We really don't get involved in politics. We have sometimes, and to our detriment. We have screwed up. There's no question. I don't want to whitewash it. We have been imperfect, and there's a lot to criticize the United States intelligence community for over now almost 85 years, a little more actually. But
I'm glad you went there before me. Yeah, and we'll come to that. Yeah,
but most of the people, first of all, you don't talk politics. I have no idea what the political affiliation of almost all the people that I work with, and they don't talk about it. It's sort of like, they say at dinner parties, you're not supposed to talk about religion, sex, or politics. They'll talk about sex. Religion and politics, they don't talk about. And it wasn't until the steady state formed in 2016 when I sort of learned about it, because what the political views were as opposed to party affiliation, because we came together in 2016 in the face of the first Trump administration, because we had worked together. We had worked together primarily looking at overseas dictators and autocrats. A lot of us had worked the Balkans. We liked each other. And this was State Department, CIA. And I found out that, when they had all, and we were all out by then, we get old, they all cared about the same things. And I found out that some of them were Republicans and some of them were Democrats. I was actually a little surprised, both sides, when I found out. But we were united even back then in the idea that we quickly began thinking, wait a second, we shouldn't get involved in domestic politics, but this is an existential threat. And that's what we believe now. And we, back in 2016, and then all the way up till 2020, at some point we decided to get involved. We endorsed candidates, we talked to people like you, we talked to reporters, we wrote, we spoke, and then Joe Biden won. We endorsed Joe Biden, including Republican people in our group. Existential threat vanquished, right? We can all go back to, what did you say? We can go back to arguing.
Yes.
And I, in fact, I don't want to spend too much time on my bio. By that point, I was out of government, but I really wanted to go back in. I went back to the Department of Homeland Security to become senior advisor to the undersecretary in the Biden administration, to tell you what things were like then in the intel community. That's part of the intel community. The undersecretary was a guy named Ken Weinstein. He was George Bush's Homeland Security advisor. Joe Biden appointed him to run DHS intelligence. And I was happy to work for him. I knew him well from my time up on the Hill working for Senator Feinstein. And he's a good guy, and he's a patriot. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff. But there we were. My job was to help him, and specifically, and I'll sort of end that part of my career there, I was the, I can't remember my title, Executive Director of the Intelligence Enterprise Program Office. That's a mouthful for you. What that is all the intel parts of the Department of Homeland Security. So we're talking ICE and CBP, as well as INA and the Coast Guard and TSA. They all have intel elements. They fall under the undersecretary. And my job was to help him manage that. And we worked really hard to make them better at intelligence. And for us, we had a phrase we sometimes used. Civil liberties is tradecraft, particularly when you're talking about domestically focused intelligence organizations, which DHS is. The day after the election, I walked into my boss and I said, "I'll be here till January 20th. I'll stand right by you, but I'm leaving on the 20th." Because all the reasons why those of us in the intelligence community know and sometimes fear our profession were coming true. We had a guy who ran for president on a platform of using us to go after his enemies. And lo and behold, he did. So I left, came back to the steady state, which sort of hadn't done anything for a while, except they did work during the 2024 election, but I was in government, so I kept away. And there you are. I rejoined, and everything we feared came true. And I can, let's talk a little bit about what we feared, but let me take your questions and see what you want to hear about.
Yeah. Well, I guess I want to start in 2017. So did you left government during the first Trump administration and then came back during the Biden administration?
I was already out. I had gone into private practice and consulting, mostly for the intelligence area. But it was the 2016 election that brought a bunch of us who had left government at least together to talk about what to do. At first, we were just going to try to help a guy who appeared to be incompetent and unprepared, but it pretty quickly became clear to us this wasn't a guy who was bad at his job at being president. He was a guy who didn't believe in being president of a constitutional democracy with separation of powers.
Yeah, I guess I want to start, with that first term and sort of on the espionage of it all and the Russia, which he says is just a totally made up conspiracy, and people I think on our side of the aisle I think maybe put it too much import on it, like he's some sort of Manchurian candidate, like he's working for Putin or beholden to Putin in some way. And it's not just like, well, no, the Russians kind of want to see an inept person who doesn't know what he's doing in office, and that helps them in its own way. What do you make of the Russian angle to Trump's rise in the first place?
Well, let me start with what I can say from my time inside. And I'll go back to that guy who was standing in front of us when I entered on duty. The Russians are a formidable and very active adversary of the United States. They have had since the revolution, and frankly before, during Tsarist times, a very active and effective, what we would call covert action, what they would call active measures campaign. From my general knowledge of Russia, these are the kind of things they do. Now, having said that, I will tell you, I'm an intelligence officer. I was an ops guy. I was an analyst, but I'm not going to reach a judgment other than what I've seen in the newspapers, because I'm not seeing the intelligence. I don't know what they're saying. But I have read the report of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which was bipartisan. It's actually signed by none other than Marco Rubio. And they make it very clear, and they had access to the intelligence. In their unclassified report, it is very clear that with one dissenting opinion or aspect, they were confident that Russia had sought to interfere in our election in a number of ways. And what has come out in the impeachment trials, one way they did that, which may have been actually later, but during the Trump administration, when he recognized he was going to be facing Joe Biden, is the effort, apparently along with others, some connected to Trump, to, among other things, dirty up Joe Biden. Now, I know people have talked about the so-called Hunter Biden laptop and everything. There's a letter out there. A lot of the people who signed that letter I know and I have a lot of respect for. I didn't sign the letter, but not because I wouldn't have, because I didn't know about the letter. And I probably wouldn't have because I am not an expert in that area. But this has the hallmarks of Russian influence. And none of us are surprised by that. And we've seen Russian influence attempts around the world and here over many, many years. What's surprising and strange is a president who seems to embrace it. That is, people sometimes talk about the great game, talking about, the major powers and their battles on the black side and the shadows and all that. Generally, there was a great and is a great game, but the idea that a president would be sort of on the other side is crazy. So, I'm fairly confident. Now, again, I'll end with saying, in the movies, they're Manchurian candidates and people completely controlled by one country or another. And sometimes they are controlled. The term is assets. But in real life, particularly at senior levels, people are complex. Everybody, we all often quoted Aretha Franklin, who's zooming who? It's much more complex than it usually is in the movie where they unmask the spy and he's the bad guy and he confesses and, he's been doing all kinds of nefarious things. Ask me to interpret Trump's actions now. My assessment is there is almost nothing that Putin could want him to do that he's not doing. Now, is that coincidence? I don't know. It's really hard to predict. We've actually written what we call a leadership analysis style piece on Donald Trump. He's pretty hard to assess. He's mercurial. He is clearly temperamental. Is he wily like a fox? Is he incredibly stupid? Is he just ignorant? He says incredible things all the time. I was just reading about the hearings with Hegseth today, actually. I think it was today.
Yeah.
Could the president really not have known that the Straits of Hormuz are straits, which means they're a really narrow piece of water off the coast of Iran? Like ninth grade what did they used to call it? It wouldn't be geography. Like everybody would know.
Well,
You'd all look at the Straits of Hormuz. Wow, it's incredibly skinny.
Like you're born on third base like Donald Trump. You don't have to do your homework, though, right?
Well, that may be true. And there's an arrogance there. And again, I said the intelligence community is designed to speak truth to power, but this power isn't interested in truth. This power is interested in, it seems, people telling him he's right and helping him tell other people he's right, which is, I think, what we thought Thursday night, actually.
Very much flattery works on this guy, but you mentioned the Hunter Biden laptop thing, and I think it's funny that there was such a controversy around Hunter Biden, who, listen, may have he worked for a Ukrainian energy company, like on the board. He was put there because he is, his name was Biden and he had access to powerful people, and I think that's probably it. Right. Meanwhile, now you have the Trump boys out there, like, actively profiting daily on all sorts of government contracts and insider information and every other thing. And because there is just so much news coming out of the fire hose, right, the corruption just sort of it happens in the background.
Yeah, well, because it's every day. And it's happening both because it's countenanced by the administration, and in effect, we have given blanket immunity to the criminal law in the United States to allies, friends, and family of Donald Trump. And again, that is what we've seen overseas, because we spent most of our life looking at dictators and autocrats. And again, about the CIA, yeah, sometimes we worked alongside their security services. I get it, which is why we know how dangerous they are. But this is exactly what we see. Every element we're talking about, the willful ignorance of facts out there, because facts don't really matter if you're not trying to build a consensus. It doesn't really matter if you're really in a democracy, because facts are the coin, sometimes overlaid with other stuff, in a democracy. The idea of, rampant state-sanctioned corruption. This is what we saw with Putin, Orban, Slobodan Milosevic, and we can go all the way back to the Italians and the Germans in the 1930s, and we could go earlier than that if we wanted to. But if you look at any dictator overseas, and there's a real difference between the autocrats and dictators and flawed democracies. There's plenty of flawed democracies. In fact, all democracies have flaws. They're all imperfect. But if you're looking at real autocrats, what we mean by that, including in competitive autocracy, it's the same pattern. There's only so many ways to become and stay a dictator. There's a playbook.
I want to put a pin in competitive autocracy and kind of come back and define that and go through. But you mentioned this kind of state sanctioned corruption that we have going on, with Trump, and it's very much a new thing, at least the brazenness of it all. And the way that relates to the way things are done in Russia or Hungary or you name your autocratic country, but like it didn't come out of nowhere here, right? We've had sort of this legalized white collar corruption in a way that we do here, and maybe it's through the way the Supreme Court's been captured and the buying of elections and things that it's sort of whittling away of democratic protections over the last 40 to 50 years, slowly. And I always like to tell people that Trump didn't come out of nowhere. Like, he's not an aberration. He is not the disease. He is a symptom of the underlying disease. And it's that, money has become too powerful in our system.
I think there's something to that, but I'm going to disagree on some of it. I think you're absolutely right that we have had a shift, a trend, a drift in the United States that reduced the particularly the legal and regulatory barriers to the power of money and how it can influence democracy. There's no question about that. But, having looked at corruption most of my life, I started in the Rackets Bureau in the New York County District Attorney's Office. There seems to me something fundamentally different here. Was this denigration of those guardrails a necessary condition for the rise of somebody like Trump? Perhaps necessary, but not sufficient. He is fundamentally different than every president. And the Republican Party right now is fundamentally different than every party we've had in the last 150 years. We could talk about sort of old school Tammany Hall kind of stuff if we want. But that's a long time ago. I do think to some extent he's an aberration. And by the way, that's one of the things that keeps me somewhat optimistic. I think that we hit a perfect storm of a thoroughly corrupt person finding himself with huge resources. That goes to your point on power of money in these elections, reduction of the guardrails, and frankly, a culture in the United States that, for one reason or other, and we're the wrong people to talk to about this, seems to have embraced a style of looking at politics as if they're watching professional wrestling, where the cheating doesn't really matter. That's sort of part of the show. You can hit people with chairs. It's all fake. There's nothing to believe in. Nothing's true. And that just, isn't the case. And I'll add one thing else that is very different about him. Truly an anomaly. I believe he's the first president who is not actually, for whatever his faults, a patriot. I don't think he cares. I think, the very few times that he's truthful, the time that really sticks in my mind is when he was walking through the graveyard. This is first term in France. And he turns to, I can't remember, it was General Milley or General Master. He turns to one of them, looking at the graves of American soldiers right up off the beach in Normandy. And he says, well, what was in it for them? I think he was asking a real question. I don't think he understands. So I'm sure if he were interviewing me now, Donald Trump would assume and believe to his heart that either I am getting paid or I am trying to get out from under some criminal problem, or I want a job, or I want a job for my friend or my wife or my child. And I think he'd say the same to you. I think he'd say, you must be getting paid by the Cubans or Soros or somebody. Somebody is paying you, Scott, right? Because you're not sitting here on a nice evening talking into a microphone because you believe in America. That's for suckers. Somebody must be paying you. I think he actually believes that.
I am still waiting on my George Soros Antifa check. But let's talk about the competitive authoritarianism. Sure. It's a term that you put out there. I want to sort of define that, and maybe we can sort of trace how we got here, because there's various elements that sort of come together to make competitive authoritarian.
Yeah. Well, it's actually did not originate with us by any means. It's originally an academic term, and it describes an evolution in autocracies and dictatorships over the 20th and into the 21st century. So imagine this evolution from a crudity to it. You get a lot of brown shirts, you kick in some doors, you do that kind of thing. Picture a coup in a undeveloped country where the army really does control everything, and if you control the army, you can decide you're president. Well, in complex societies, particularly late 20th century and 21st century, that sort of doesn't work for two reasons. You can't amass that power. And second, you don't want to amass that power because the society is too complex to run from putting your feet up on the table in the presidential palace and telling people to go machine gun people. You got to keep the oil flowing. You got to keep the banks running. So what evolved was the idea that no, you keep the institutions of traditional liberal democracy. You keep the legislature. You keep maybe the so-called free market system. you have, at least on paper, free speech. You allow there to be a media, but it's all controlled. The strings are being pulled. One way to think about it is like in the old science fiction movies where the evil alien inhabits the body of the earthling, and using that body, doesn't destroy the body, doesn't kill the earthlings, takes over the body. I can't remember which movie it is where they take over all the bodies. But that's how competitive authoritarianism works. You take over the body of civil society and you make it start doing what you want to do. That's fundamentally what we mean by competitive authoritarianism.
So in terms of like the media, the freedom of speech, where you have loyalists take over things like CBS News as they've done now, or TikTok as they've done, or CNN as they are going to do. So, on top of the Fox News, we understand the Fox News of it all, and that's always sort of been a propaganda operation. But now you have other friendly outlets, as it were, and taken to its logical conclusion, you'd think that he would like to have friendly folks in charge at NBC and ABC as well. They put pressure on these networks, suing them, suing ABC, threatening them over Jimmy Kimmel, threatening, suing George Stephanopoulos and all other things.
The New York Times reporters.
Just recently over this Air Force One story. Yeah,
exactly. Yep.
And that's the free press of it all. But then you've got the elections, and we think, well, you have an election, the winner wins. But then we have things like gerrymandering in this country, voter suppression with the SAVE Act, which is on the table, and that's on top of the voter suppression we already sort of have. Strict voter ID laws. Indiana invented that, at least the most recent iteration of them. I said the gerrymandering, the voter ID, the electoral college. If you want to go back to the Constitution, that is sort of an anti-democratic element built in. The disproportional representation in the Senate. So we have all these mechanisms sort of built in where to your point earlier, you mentioned professional wrestling. It is sort of like, well, it looks like they're fighting. It looks like there's an election going on. It looks like the free press is holding the leader accountable, but the outcomes are, if not predetermined, the playing field is certainly not level.
And we can disagree. I mean, you listed a series of things there, and I'm betting if we had the time, we could go through them, and we would probably disagree on which one of them are evoke competitive authoritarianism or something else. So, for instance, the disproportionate representation issue, the Great Compromise, is that a anti-democratic, or the other argument is it's pro-democratic, because if you didn't have it, basically Boston and New York would decide everything back then. And frankly, but that's the kind of thing we argue about in a liberal democracy. But I mean, even gerrymandering, the problem with gerrymandering, and I'm not in favor of gerrymandering, but the problem is when you say, okay, what's the alternative? It starts getting hard when you start trying to draw the maps. But there are alternatives, and we could debate them in a democracy. And that's what Donald Trump does not want us to do. And he's moved beyond the how can we improve the system? And there's no question that many of our systems, our electoral system, our financial system, all warrant close examination and improvement. That's not what he's talking about. He's not like saying, I want to pass a law because it would make something better. What he's talking about is, I don't want a free press. I don't want people debating the laws. I want to shut them up. And it's not only the press. And in fact, I'll go back to the term we use are indicators. It's an intel term. It comes out of the Cold War, INW, indicators and warning. It's how you know the Russians are going to come through the Fulda Gap. But we applied it here. And, we sort of bucketed things. Media, academia, elections, legislature, security services, us people. Every dictator does the same thing. Again, I said earlier, there are not that many ways to become a dictator. And the media, they all go after the media. The newer ones don't do it so crudely. They buy the media, or they have their friends buy the media, or they sue the media. They make it hard. And we can go all the way back, by the way, to the founding. One reason the stamp tax was pissed people off is it kept people from actually putting out paper, like actually printing out stuff. It was an effort by the crown to shut people up, in addition to raise some revenue. That's competitive authoritarianism. And if you go through those buckets, you're in one of those buckets. I'm in one of those buckets. The academic institutions are in one of those buckets, and so on and so forth. We put out some things that sort of try to put a red, green, yellow on it, and it's blinking red on pretty much all of them. That's why we think we're in a crisis, an existential crisis. And I love what you said at the top of the hour, which was sort of, we want to get back to arguing. That's what's in danger. You and we are, and I am sure if I was sitting in your very nice living room there, or whatever room you're in, we could probably go into the night arguing a lot of things. What Donald Trump is taking us to is a world where you and I can't argue, where we can't have a town meeting and argue. We can't do this and argue. We can't write each other. We have to worry about it. And frankly, I'm worried now. You're putting this out streaming. I have no idea whether the Department of Homeland Security has a piece of AI listening to us now, picking out the keywords. Let's make sure we don't say anything that sounds violent, and putting that together.
I assume I'm on a list somewhere.
You very well may be. What you probably aren't. I've written on this a little bit. There isn't a list. What AI gets us, and what's different now, by the way, is we have some technology that changes the dynamic. Dictators up until 10 years ago needed lists. Literally needed lists. There would be a list. You don't need a list anymore. When you don't use lists anymore. You go to Google or you go to ChatGPT and you ask it to give me every movie that won an Academy Award, in an odd numbered year. It's not going to a list. It's going to a list of years and a list of movies, something else that explains odd and even, putting it together, it spits it out for you. You can go to ChatGPT right now, and you could probably put into it, give me a list of the top 30 progressive radio streamers or in the Midwest. And it's searching tons of lists and putting them together with some dumb smarts. There you'll be. Then I can ask it, give me a list of the guests on those. And there I'll be.
Right. And but when we've seen the way this can go awry with Doge, at the beginning of the administration last year, and how they would, use AI to go through all these various government programs and just eliminate things that had keywords in them. And because they, they didn't double check their work and just relied on AI for everything, it wound up cutting a lot of things that were actually necessary and things that weren't what they thought they were cutting. Something about like transmutation in the genetics of mice or something. They saw the word trans and thought it had to do with transgender surgery or something. Anytime like diverse, like biodiversity. Oh, it says diversity. Therefore, DEI, right? Yeah. So I guess we can rest that because the ineptitude of AI at this point will send up a bunch of false positives, right? They're not going to come knocking on our door.
Let me push back on that a little bit. You're right. If you're worried about the false positives, in other words, I'm really worried that I'll shut down a program that shouldn't be shut down, because now that I understand that transgenic mice is a good area of research for cancer research. But if I don't care about that, if I don't care that, okay, I picked up, Scott Aaron Rodgers. The guy I was looking for is Scott Aaron Roger. Who cares? I don't care. And that's a fundamental difference. I can tell you from my time at DHS, and some people will find this hard to believe, we spent a lot of time worrying about false positives in the work we were doing, mostly looking for terrorists. We were terrified that we would get the wrong person. And get doesn't even mean do something to them, even put them on our radar screen. We spent tons of money on it. we spent huge amounts of time. We were talking about those lists. And one of the things I've explained to people is, when I was at DHS, we spent a lot of time trying to take multiple lists and getting them to talk to each other to yield a list. And, you go to the way that works in the government. When we did it is, I hate to say it, you go to like Booz Allen or one of those big companies. You say, I have 5 databases and I want them to be able to talk to each other. And then it turns out they were all done by different contractors over 25 years. And one of them is done in COBOL, if anybody listening remembers what COBOL is. And Booz Allen says, okay, give us $1 million and we'll do that. And then when I was there, the government said, wait a second, but I want to make sure that the only people who can see the results have the right security clearances. Oh, and I also want to show that the only people who can see the results have checked with 2 different supervisors before they punch into the machine. And I want to make sure, I want to run tests, and I want the false positive rate to be under 1%. And Booz Allen says, oh, you remember that $1 million? It's $20 million. Because It's really hard to do that.
Yeah.
I don't think they give a crap about those $19 million of make this not give false positives. Build this so it can protect people's civil liberties. We don't want to get this wrong. If you don't care, it's way easier. I don't know if you saw the depositions of the Doge guys who were doing that. It was pretty... They weren't saying, I feel a little bad that I canceled some programs that I didn't really understand. It was, I hate to say it, it was go pound sand. I don't care. Transgender, they shouldn't have named those mice with a trans in it. And who cares about
we saved the government some money anyway, so I guess it was all worth it in the end. And we see this administration certainly doesn't care if they get the wrong person. We just in the last couple of weeks with ICE, they killed a couple of guys who weren't even the target of their immigration operation. They shouldn't have been pulled over in the first place, and they wind up dead. And then you get Tom Homan comes out and is like, well, they should have complied, And that's what we have with this administration. And I guess to your point earlier, and I said sort of the logical extension of where we've been headed, but you said, well, this is an order of magnitude different. And I guess this is one of those orders of magnitude where it's completely different.
And it's not only an order of magnitude; it is an opposite. So, and again, this gets to your point about the regulations and the law. Most Americans, I think, without thinking about it, think, well, all of the protections for us are there. They're in the Constitution, and they're in the statutes, they're in the courts, and they're in the laws and the regulations. All of those are important. But what really matters in the day-to-day running of intelligence agencies, particularly domestic ones, law enforcement agencies, and lots of other kinds of agencies, but the ones that I'm familiar with that have people's lives and freedom at stake, is that the people hired to do this buy into the idea that we should care. So I can tell you that it's not only Booz Allen wanted that extra $90 million, the government employees from Ken Weinstein down in my old office, they wanted it. Like the amount of time I spent around various conference tables with all kinds of argument in which everybody at the table completely bought into the idea we have to protect civil liberties. We also have to protect against terrorism. How can we get as much of both as we can? And then literally spend hours, sometimes months, of fighting over that, arguing over that, because that's what they hired you for. That's what they praise you for. And that's what they promote you for. They don't fire you for it. That's gone. I've been at a million of those meetings. I never once thought that if I, raised my hand at the meeting and said, something, I think the operation you're planning is just not a good idea and not consistent with American values. I may lose the argument, but nobody in all my years in government, and that's going all the way back to my time in the state government, ever would have said, get the hell out of here. And that's what we're seeing now. And when you get rid of everybody, and you don't hire them for it either, every interview I've ever done for a job and done myself for a job in the federal or state government, there's a variety of questions that involve. So tell me how you're going to do the right thing when you're faced with a difficult problem.
I want to talk about some of those conversations that maybe have happened in our intelligence agencies and our spy agencies and what have you over the last 85 years now at this point.
I'll be careful, but I'll do my best.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, listen, it's not news for this audience to know that we have interfered in other countries' democratic processes on many occasions. We have fostered coups abroad. We have, overthrown elections, essentially. Iran, Guatemala, Chile, Nicaragua, countless others, I'm sure, where we've done these things. And, I wonder if were those conversations taking place there at that time? Did the wrong people just win out, or was it okay because it's not here? And, I guess, did we have it coming? Did we threw the imperial boomerang, it was bound to come back and hit us in the head?
Well, you're asking actually a pretty complex problem. And I'll sort of start by, I'm not that old. Most of the places you mentioned, I wasn't born yet, or I was like in high school. But the short answer is going to be yes. But here's the more complex area. The idea of what you're describing is called covert action. It is embraced in statute. There's a law that both empowers and directs, particularly the CIA, to conduct covert action at the direction of the president. We can have two different kinds of debates on, well, really three. First of all, should we have that law? Should we change that law? We could have a law that says no covert action. And I go back to what you said at the beginning. In our process, we could change that law if we elect representatives who want to change that law. And we have both expanded and decreased the powers given to our intelligence agencies in statute over time, depending on when it is and what voters want to do. Second line of argument, and you alluded to that, is the question of put aside the morality of it and the legality of it. Does it work? Is it just stupid? And we probably shouldn't do stupid things. Now, on the stupid question, I can tell you that I am quite confident that there were lots and lots and lots of discussion, not only within the agency, but remember, covert action, particularly after the addition to the statute that makes it defined, it has to be briefed to Congress. Those arguments took place up on Capitol Hill with your elected congressional representatives, in the White House, because the White House is the place, the National Security Council, and in the Oval Office, where people argue about this. Should we do this? Will it work? Is this better or worse? And then there's that third strand, which I alluded to, which is it wrong? And again, the first and the third are related because we can argue about whether it's wrong in the halls of Congress, in our newspapers, on your show. But people in the national security community, I can't say everybody, obviously, think about these questions and think about them hard. Remember, not only do we do espionage and covert action, we've watched the Russians do it, the North Koreans do it, the Serbs do it, and so on and so forth. We know how horrible the results can be. We know that it can be a terrible thing. So I think people would be surprised. Do we come out with the right answer? I have no idea. I know for me, what I was comfortable with and what I wasn't comfortable with. That's why I talked to my wife that night before I started off. Am I going to come in and they're going to say, hey, guess what we're doing? We're going out and doing some horrible things and we're, mass killings and something like that. I would have had to resign. But people actually do talk about this. And again, what's worrying me is I don't think those conversations happen anymore. I don't think they can happen anymore.
you walked right where I wanted to go. Is like, are there still conscientious people in our national security apparatus, or have they all been purged? I mean, I'm sure you and your colleagues still have contacts that are still in the game, as it were, or do you? Are they all gone?
We don't know completely the answer. A lot of them are gone. A lot of them were either fired, purged is more the right word, or chased out, or moved to other areas. I am sure that some people are still in, sort of keep their head down. Some people resigned, myself. I'm really hesitant. And by the way, this is one of the powers of a dictator in purges, because in the movies, you walk out dramatically, I will not have anything to do with this. But we're talking about people with kids and mortgages and health insurance needs and, wives or husbands or partners who don't have a job or need a job. It's really hard, and it's scary. Not to mention that, we've seen what's happened with people on the inside who have left and then they go after them. And we've seen people, including some senior leaders, who have spoken out rather loudly about the dangers of Donald Trump, and they're facing indictments or potential indictments. So these guys are not kidding around. But are there people inside who are conscientious and thinking about this? And I don't mean that they would agree with me or agree with you, but are they at least thinking it through? I think they still are, but I think it's really hard, and I don't envy where they are.
It's got to be tricky for sure, because you want people like that to stay in there and have their ear to the ground and
push back.
I don't know if it's to speak up in these meetings or just to know what's going on, right? But without that, we are really far down the rabbit hole. How do we get out of this place where we are at? I think of Hungary recently, right? Mm-hmm. They are or were a good example of this competitive authoritarianism, and I guess that's where the competitive comes in. There's still a chance, I guess, but you really have to thread the needle.
It's really hard, but it's doable. And I obviously think it's doable, or I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I don't golf, but I'd be retiring someplace. I'm in my 60s. I don't have to do this anymore. But this, before I answer your question, I think my colleagues would all say something along the lines I'm about to say, which is, for most of us, this is the most important thing we've ever worked on. And that's what's keeping us writing and speaking and talking, even though we're sort of done professionally, but we're back in the game. And by game, I don't mean playing spy. We're not doing any of that kind of stuff. We're completely transparent. We don't give all our membership away, but you can look up most of our members over on our website. By the way, I loved your intro when you told people where to find you. I'm so bad at doing that. I'll try at the end if you give me a shot. But let me get back to your actual question. What do we do? We have a little couple of sayings along the way. There's a little pun in here. The first is get smart. Americans have an urgent need to learn more about how their government works and what's happening. And how do you get smart? Well, people like you do shows like this. People need to read. People need to ask questions. You need to spend some time, as much as it really sucks to read the newspaper every day or wherever you get your news. We got to learn that. So you need to know what the Anti-Deficiency Act is. You need to know what many of these three-letter agencies are, and not just mine. We talked at the beginning a little bit before we went on the end. You need to know what NOAA is. You know what know what the NWS is. That's why your weather reports aren't good anymore. People have to get smart. Second thing they have to do, and this is why I'm so glad to be here, organize. Every single successful resistance to either rising autocrat or the removal of an autocrat overseas involves organizations across demographics, across religion, across age, across policy. strange bedfellows. You used it when you opened. We've talked about it. We've actually written about it. The people who end up successfully marching in the streets, and sometimes that's metaphorical, but marching in the streets are people who would never march next to each other in normal times. That's what we need. Third thing, and there are going to be four actually. Third thing, we're in a democracy still. It's not over yet. This is not yet a competitive autocracy, although we're skidding very quickly in that direction. Vote, 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 vote. And I only mean once, but I mean you got to do it. And convince other people to vote. And now the final thing is different here in the United States than we've ever seen in my lifetime. What I'm basically saying is get smart, get involved, do your part as a citizen in our democracy. And plenty of people have done that over many years, have been active, have been, whether you're a progressive or conservative, lots of active people. But there never was any real risk. I need to put a footnote there. Unless you were Black or Hispanic, gay, and at one point in the 20th century, a woman. But other than that, little risk. I was politically active before I went to the agency. I never thought that getting involved in, the McGovern campaign or was going to get me hurt or lose a job or lose money or get me in jail. Like, it didn't even occur to me. Like, it just didn't. There's real risk now. We are far enough toward autocracy that people are going to jail. People are losing their jobs. People are getting shot. And what I'm asking people to do, the first three things is just like homework. You got to do it. Everybody can do it. It's just, put the time and effort into it. And sometimes money, if you're donating. The last one, I'm hesitant. And because I think everybody's risk tolerance is very different. And it's a really personal decision. Everybody's life situation is different. And one person's appropriate risk is not another person. What I will tell people, and I'll recount this. I gave a talk at a school about all of this. And a young woman at the back of the room raised her hand. She's wearing a hijab. And she said, "What do I do? I'm scared." And my answer was, I can't tell you to do anything. You're right to be scared. Your choice on how much fear you're willing to endure. But, and I was talking to the rest of the room, none of whom are wearing a hijab. Everybody here has to share your risk. That's what we need to do.
Yes. That's something we talk about a lot here, is that folks with privilege have to be able to stick their necks out there. Folks that look like you and I think can take more risks than some other folks, like the girl in the hijab, like the Black and brown folks and the women and the queer folks, like you mentioned at previous points in our history, and they put themselves on the line and shouldn't have had to, but now it's our turn to put ourselves on the line. And I do need to start wrapping up here, but I want to ask about the election this year. We saw this speech that Trump gave the other night, and it, pulled on a lot of intelligence that we don't have time to go through it all. I'd love for you to literally just break down all of the fallacies that he put out there. But
watch our spot in the next couple of days. We'll have some stuff up.
but clearly he's laying the groundwork to do something around the election again this year. Like in 2020, there were a lot of red flags, a lot of warning signs throughout, breadcrumbs, as it were, throughout the summer, as they were going to try something, and they did. It wasn't a shock to people who were paying attention. What's coming this fall, and how do we fight back against it, short of just voting?
Well, what's coming is a concerted and continued effort both to delegitimize the idea of elections, to call into question whether we even have a democracy, whether it's worth voting, or should you spend your time watching golf. It could escalate. It could involve deployment of troops, deployment of ICE, which I have even come to start calling paramilitaries, to make it scary to vote or to make it difficult to vote. That's what the SAVE Act is all about. It could involve, in certain states, refusal to certify electoral results. Could end up in January with the Congress refusing to certify electoral results. There's any number, declaring a state of emergency, suspending habeas corpus. The president has a lot of tools, mostly statutory and tools in the form of people who have guns and badges, and a big megaphone. The president could just say, look, we're under a biological attack. Everybody stay inside. We have to cancel the election. You're going to go out and see if there's anthrax? What can we do? One, we have to be pushing back now. The media, people, we have to be questioning when he starts doing what he did on Thursday. And I was very heartened by the response I saw, which is people didn't take what he said. Even Fox News didn't take what he said as gospel. We need to be doing that. We need to be building relationships with our state and local officials. Talk about strange bedfellows. If you can, and it's depending on where you are, you need to be talking to your local police department. Particularly community leaders going in there and saying, we're really worried. We're worried that on election day, there are going to be people here who want to beat us up. We want you to know that we expect you to protect us. And by the way, among the people voting, Chief, Lieutenant, whatever your name is, that's your daughter, that's your son, that's your nephew. We need to be telling our local poll people, our local whatever board of elections, that we're going to support them and that we understand. We need to volunteer to be poll watchers. We need to talk about what's going on, call out what's crap, and be very, very clear about it. It's doable. It swept out Orban. It swept out Slobodan Milosevic. We've seen it happen. It can happen here, and we have a lot of advantages over the people in Hungary and Serbia. We're not starving. We have shoes, and a lot of them didn't, or at least not recently bought shoes. So we can do this, and then get back to arguing.
I look forward to that for sure, 100%. Stephen, we barely scratched the surface. There are so many things I want to ask you, but alas, I wasn't supposed to say alas, but I said, alas, we have to leave it there.
That's better. You're saying alas that I'm leaving, not alas that I'm coming. That's exactly what I was hoping.
Very good. So listen, let me give you that opportunity to shamelessly promote yourself. You said you're bad at this part, so make sure you get in all those socials, and I will definitely link to the website and the Substack for sure.
Well, the Substack and the website are the important things. They all have Steady State in the name, or The Steady State. Keep away from the economists who are also steady state people. But our website is www.thesteadystate.org. We put up 1 or 2 essays a day sometimes, as well as analytic product. And from our website, you can get to all of our social media. And we also speak and talk. I was just actually out in Indiana around 4 weeks ago. I spoke to Indivisible, a wonderful meeting. They were great hosts. You find some people who need to hear from one of us, and have a former CIA officer or ambassador come and speak to your group. We'll try to make it happen either in virtual time or in real time. But get smart, start organizing, find some strange bedfellows, and get ready to vote. Thanks for having me.
Very good. Stephen, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here with us this evening. If you don't mind, stay put. I'm going to send you backstage, say goodbye to the folks, and then in 3 or 4 minutes, I'll say goodbye to you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, that once again was Stephen Cash, Executive Director of the Steady State. And hey, there we are. There's our graphics. And as I said, I will link to their website and the Substack in the show notes, which will be available later tonight at progressiveindiana.net. And again, you can find all my work there as well as that of other left-leaning Hoosier voices. We can't do it without your support, so please consider contributing to Who's Left and the wider network with a paid subscription if you're able. This independent media project relies solely on the generosity of kind patrons like you to make this information available for free to everybody. Again, that is at progressiveindiana.net. I will be back Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. for Who's Left This Week, Indiana's only unapologetically progressive Sunday morning politics show. My guests this week are Muncie area activist and organizer Chelsea McDonnell and Medicare for All Indiana's Dr. Rob Stone. We will discuss the week's top Indiana stories plus U.S. and international news through a Hoosier lens. Tune in on YouTube, Facebook Live, or on Substack Live, again at progressiveindiana.net. Thanks again to Stephen for a great discussion. Thank you for watching. Connect with me online at whosleft.us, on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads, at Who's Left on all the rest. Direct message me at any of those sites with feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns, or email me at scott@whosleft.us. Last thing, please forward the show to a friend and have them pass it on too. Let's keep building this project and a truly democratic state, one conversation at a time. Until the next one, this has been the Who's Left Podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.